They said Winterridge Academy was a place of prestige, tucked into the mist-veiled woods of Vermont, hidden from the world like an ancient secret. The boarding school looked more like a Gothic fortress than an institute of learning. Its iron gates creaked with memory, its stone towers pierced the overcast sky like sentinels from another era. And when Isla Wren arrived on the first snowy morning of November, she knew two things. One, that she didn't belong, and two, that someone had gone to great lengths to make sure she was here anyway. She stepped out of the town car sent to retrieve her from the station, her boots crunching over a carpet of frostbitten leaves. A bitter wind swept across the courtyard, carrying with it the scent of pine, and something else beneath it, something she couldn't quite name. Her transfer papers were folded tightly in the pocket of her coat. She had read them enough times to know the creases by heart, but not enough to understand why the name Isla Marie Wren was printed so deliberately bold. She was a late addition, a sudden appearance, the kind of student the school registrar might whisper about when the lights flickered after dark. At 21, Isla was older than most of the students, yet newer than all. Her dark hair was pinned in a loose braid that fell over one shoulder, and the way she carried her leather satchel suggested both weariness and purpose. She kept her eyes steady as she approached the front entrance, past the towering stone gargoyles, past the students who paused mid-conversation to stare. A girl in a crimson scarf whispered something to her friend. Isla didn't flinch. She had lived through worse than curiosity. Inside, the halls of Winterridge were colder than the air outside. Arched ceilings loomed overhead. Paintings watched with eyes that felt too alive. There was history in the stones, and something else layered beneath it, a silence that wasn't merely silence, but waiting. She was met by Headmistress Bellamy, a tall woman with silver hair pulled into a severe bun, and a voice that held the cadence of finality. "Miss Wren," she said, without offering a hand. "You're late. The train was delayed." Bellamy gave her a long look, then turned on her heel. "Follow me." They walked in silence, down a corridor that grew narrower the deeper they went. Doors lined the passage, all closed. Isla wondered what secrets lay behind them, what whispers they held in the hollow hours of night. Finally, they reached a heavy oak door. Bellamy turned the brass knob. "This will be your room," she said, stepping aside. "Classes begin promptly at 8. You're expected to keep up. We do not slow down for stragglers." The door creaked open. The room was sparse. One bed, one desk, one window that looked out onto the winter barren woods. "Thank you," Isla said softly. Bellamy studied her a moment longer. "They said you'd be different," she murmured. Then, as if remembering herself, she straightened. "Unpack quickly. There will be an orientation tour at 6. And just like that, she was gone. Isla stood in the center of the room, alone with her satchel and her silence. She ran her fingers over the desk's carved surface and paused. There, beneath the varnish, were initials, E.H. Faint, almost invisible. She frowned. And then, as snow began to fall outside the window like sifted ash, she whispered to herself, "What happened here?" The wind outside Eldridge Preparatory Academy whispered through the brittle leaves, rattling against the stained glass windows of room 207. Inside, the classroom hummed with forced attention, students scribbling notes as Ms. Winslow's chalk dragged across the blackboard with practiced urgency. Lena Caldwell, 17, shifted in her seat, her long, dark hair draped neatly over one shoulder. A soft curtain she used to shield herself from the stares. She kept her eyes down, focused on her notebook. Even though the page had long since blurred into meaninglessness, something in the air prickled. She could feel it, like static, like waiting. Then it happened. A pause in the lesson, the silence that wrapped too tightly. "Miss Caldwell," Ms. Winslow said, her voice smooth, but with a sharp edge tucked just beneath the syllables. You seem unusually distracted this morning. Or is it that the material is beneath you? Lena looked up, blinking. The room was watching now. She could feel the shift, the leaning in. I'm following along, she replied, her voice careful, even polite. Are you? Miss Winslow offered a smile, thin, theatrical. That must be comforting. I suppose when your father's name is stamped on half the school's donor plaques, you learn to coast on legacy. A few murmurs from the back of the room, not laughter worse. The kind of quiet that marks territory, that isolates. Lena said nothing. Ms. Winslow turned back to the board with a dismissive flick of the wrist. Do try to keep up, Miss Caldwell. Not all of us were born into academic immunity. The lesson continued, but Lena, she was no longer in the room. She was inside her head, replaying the words, the timing, the expression. This wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Later, in the cafeteria, she sat across from Harper and Jude. Harper leaned in, brows drawn. What was that back there? With Winslow. Lena shook her head. It's nothing. She's just intense. No, Harper said flatly. That wasn't intense. That was loaded. Jude stayed quiet, his eyes on his tray. He didn't look up when he said, She doesn't like you. Lena smiled weakly. That obvious, huh? You know she used to teach at a private college, right? Got dismissed after some incident. No one talks about it, but she hates privilege, especially the kind with last names like yours. Lena let the words sink in. Outside, the wind picked up, but inside her, something colder had already settled. She didn't want trouble. She had come to Eldridge to escape it. But trouble, it seemed, had already marked her for something she hadn't chosen. The days that followed began to blend into one another, like the pages of a novel, too painful to reread. Lena kept her head down, her notebook always close, her answers fewer. Her laughter faded. The halls of Crescent Hollow High, once merely corridors of lockers and noise, had become a maze of eyes, watching, whispering, weighing her down. Ms. Winslow's voice had grown softer in public, but her precision sharper. Every praise was lined with insinuation. Every critique felt like a performance, designed to diminish. Her favorite line now came with a smile that never reached her eyes. Some students mistake presence for significance. The class chuckled, some nervously, others with unspoken complicity. Lena just swallowed hard. Even Lena's best friend, Jonah, had started to ask questions. You're not you anymore, he said one day under the bleachers during lunch. You flinch when your name gets called. You barely look up. Are you scared of her? Lena didn't answer. Not because she didn't want to, but because the answer might have unraveled her. At home, the shift was more subtle. Her mother, always sharp and busy, had started pausing longer after dinner. Her father, a local journalist, had pulled out old photo albums and left them open on the table, as if reminding her of a time she had smiled with certainty. Then came the night when everything shifted again. Lena stayed after school to work on an article for the school paper. The newsroom was in the old wing, quiet, forgotten, walls lined with dusty trophies and faded photos. She was finishing her final paragraph when she heard voices in the hallway. One of them unmistakably belonged to Miss Winslow. She walks around like she owns the place, the teacher hissed, unaware of Lena's presence, always thinking she's better. But I know who her father really was, and maybe it's time someone reminded her of that. The words punched harder than Lena expected. Her father. The man who had died 3 years ago, his reputation never questioned, his name respected. Her breath hitched. What did Ms. Winslow know? What did she mean? Lena waited until the voices faded, then gathered her things and ran not toward home, but to the one place that had always made sense. her father's study. There, in the attic of their creaking Victorian home, dust clung to journals, old files, and newspapers tied with string. She pulled open the first bundle and froze. There, in her father's handwriting, was a name she hadn't seen in years. Winslow. A chill raced down her spine. Something was hidden, and she was about to find out what. By the next morning, the hallway chatter had shifted. People didn't speak to Sienna. They spoke about her. Soft murmurs trailed behind her like smoke. Half admiration, half venom. She's the girl who won the resilience essay. She's the girl with the famous father. She's the one Miss Holbrook can't stand. It wasn't just the attention. It was the temperature shift in the air, like someone had turned the school thermostat down by 10 degrees. Friendly faces grew colder. Smiles turned tight. Eye contact became either too much or too little. And then came the next cut. During literature class, Miss Holbrook handed back their essays with her usual precision, her heels clicking like a metronome between the desks. But when she paused in front of Sienna, the silence thickened. "A fine effort," she said without warmth, then louder, just enough for others to hear, "though I suppose resilience does come easier when you're born with a safety net." The words landed like glass. Sienna didn't flinch, but inside, something flickered. She could feel the burn of 20 silent stares. She wanted to scream, to speak, to defend herself, but the room had already decided which story it wanted to believe. At home, she said nothing. She sat through dinner, with her fork barely moving. Her father told a joke about a client who tried to pay in Bitcoin, and her mother laughed politely. But the air around Sienna was heavy with the things she wouldn't say. That night, her reflection in the bathroom mirror looked back with quiet defiance. She touched the ends of her hair, long and unruly, and whispered to herself, "This is who I am." Miss Holbrook's obsession with the dress code escalated the following week. Twice, Sienna was stopped in the hallway. Once, in front of the library, as Miss Holbrook murmured, "You know the handbook frowns on loose hair. It's a distraction." Then again, in class, "We must all remember, appearances send messages. We are not here to draw attention." But it was never about the rules. It was about control. It was about her, and the whispers spread like ink through water. "She thinks she's special. She only got that award because of her last name. I bet she paid someone to write the essay." Sienna's friends' once pillars began to drift. Ava stopped, saving her a seat. Liam started texting less. The cafeteria became a cold battlefield of eyes that didn't meet hers, until one day, after class, Miss Holbrook asked her to stay. The room emptied. Sienna remained seated, her fingers curled tightly around the edges of her notebook. "I warned you, Miss Ray," Miss Holbrook said, her voice coated in ice. "You've mistaken attention for respect. That hair, that posture. This isn't a stage." Sienna's heart thudded in her chest. "I haven't broken any rules," she said softly. The teacher's gaze hardened. "No, but you've broken balance." Then, from her desk drawer, she pulled something small. Scissors. Sienna's blood turned to frost. "Let's fix that," Miss Holbrook said. Right now, Sienna didn't move. For a second, the room stood still, like the air had been vacuumed out. The scissors in Miss Holbrook's hand didn't gleam, they glared. Cold, metallic. A symbol, not of correction, but of control. "Sit down," Miss Holbrook ordered again, her voice low, sugar laced with steel. Sienna's feet obeyed before her heart could catch up. She sat slowly, the plastic chair creaking beneath her, her fists clenched in her lap. "You need to learn that the rules apply to everyone," Miss Holbrook murmured, stepping closer. "You can't do this," Sienna whispered. But the words sounded far away. Miss Holbrook's hand reached out, fingers brushing through Sienna's hair like it was something disposable. And then, snip. The sound was soft, but it detonated inside Sienna's skull. The first lock fell to the floor. Then another. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only sit frozen as her hair, her armor, her expression, herself unraveled onto the cold tile floor. "You're not better than them," Miss Holbrook said, stepping back, chest heaving ever so slightly. "Now maybe you'll understand that." And she walked away. Sienna didn't cry. Not then. She stood on trembling legs, gathered her things like a ghost in a girl's body, and walked out. She didn't stop until she was 3 blocks from the school, shaking as the wind clawed through her uneven hair. She got home before anyone else, locked the door behind her, climbed the stairs, stared at herself in the mirror. The jagged pieces of her hair looked like the aftermath of war. Her face, pale, shocked, blank. Her hands ran through the ruins. Her breath trembled. And then she collapsed. The sobs came like a dam burst open, racking, heaving, silent and violent all at once. When her mother found her hours later, curled in bed, hood pulled over her head, she didn't ask questions at first, but when Sienna pulled the hood down, silence, a single inhale, her mother's hands flew to her mouth. "Then who did this to you, Miss Holbrook?" Sienna whispered. She said, "I thought I was special." Later that evening, when her father came home and saw her, he didn't say anything at all, but he didn't need to. His jaw was set like a cliff face. His eyes were full of storms. The next morning, he said, "We're going to the school." And Sienna knew something had shifted. The school didn't know what was coming. Sienna's father wasn't loud. He was lethal, in stillness, his presence like iron, wrapped in velvet. He asked for the principal, politely, then closed the office door behind them. Sienna sat next to her mother as her father unfolded the entire story, calm, direct, undeniable. The principal's face turned grey as he listened, then white when Sienna's father pulled out a phone and played the video. A fellow student had filmed the moment, a 10-second clip. Miss Holbrook, the scissors, the sound of cutting, the sharp fall of hair to the floor, and the room went silent. The principal stood up. "There will be consequences," he said, swift and serious. And for the first time in weeks, Sienna felt like someone was standing with her. The next week was a blur of hearings, news headlines, and phone calls. Parents, journalists, board officials. The story went viral. The girl who had her hair cut by a teacher, the daughter of a high-profile attorney, the quiet student who had said nothing until the silence exploded. The school launched a formal investigation. Miss Holbrook was suspended, pending dismissal. A public apology was issued. New protocols were introduced. Teachers were retrained. Anonymous reporting systems were installed. But most importantly, Sienna was no longer invisible. She went back to school after a week, and when she stepped through those gates, her head held high despite the uneven cut. The whispers were quieter, the glances held more awe than pity. Some students looked at her like she was a phoenix, scarred, but on fire. Weeks passed. The karate tournament returned. Sienna hesitated. At first, her confidence still fragile. But when she walked past the sign-up sheet, something in her heart thumped loud. She wrote her name. The day of the tournament, she stood under the gym lights, in her crisp GI, her hair barely brushing the nape of her neck. When they called her name, she stepped forward not to prove anything, but to reclaim herself. She won. The crowd applauded. Her parents cried quietly in the front row. But for Sienna, the real victory came after, in the silence, in the breath she took, in the way she looked in the mirror that night, not seeing the girl who had been cut down, but the one who had risen anyway, because she was more than her scars, more than what had been taken from her, more than the name they used against her. She was fire reborn, and that would always be enough.